Hi Sarah, hi Rob. How are
Hi.
you today?
Very good.
Great.
Thanks. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for being here. And it's good to have you here at the European Battery Show in Stuttgart. And I would love to talk a bit about supply chains, if that's okay.
Absolutely. That's what we're quite good at talking about, so happy to.
Great, yeah. If you want to come to the microphone and maybe share some insights on battery supply chains, maybe quickly introduce yourself. Why do you care about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is I've always worked in supply chains, initially in diamond supply chains, then moved into other mined materials, including the mined materials going into batteries, and got involved in the Global Battery Alliance in its very early days of bringing together industry to set the standards for what does a sustainable battery and its supply chain need to look like. At that time, the industry realizing, okay, we're going to have this huge uptake of clean mobility and clean energy, and one of the biggest challenges to us being able to do this as quickly as possible is the backlash of people not believing that it's actually a sustainable alternative. And so that was kind of the goal of, okay, how does the industry set the standards of what a sustainable battery looks like so that it can form the foundations of making this happen as quickly as possible. And so, yeah, ever since then have been involved in battery supply chain world, and a couple of years ago set up Infyos, specifically focused on building the tools that the industry need in order to manage sustainability of their companies, their products and their supply chains. But yeah, also happy to talk a bit more in detail about what are the battery supply chains as well.
For sure. And Rob, you joined and you bring a lot of
Yes.
other aspects from supply chains as well.
Yeah, I've spent all of my very long career in automotive supply chain. So it's been fascinating coming to the show because for me to reflect on that from all of my time in automotive is we're seeing a new industry here. It's a kind of industrial revolution. So it's very exciting to see all the new companies that are going to hopefully participate in what will be this transition from internal combustion engine to electrification, an electric vehicle. What's fascinating, and as Sarah said, one of the key topics is sustainability, so that's why we're here today to talk about how we ensure that those supply chains as they go into industrialisation are clean and as far as possible we are CO2 neutral, CO2 zero. But also for me there are lots of other topics around capacity, there are lots of topics about the price and the costs of electric propulsion systems, and it's fascinating over the next few years how procurement people, supply chain people inside the industry and automotive and in the first tier supply chains are going to manage that transition. And also, as we talked about earlier, how they're going to manage out the, let's say, the legacy supply chains from the old internal combustion engine industry. So, yeah, it's such an exciting time to be in the industry, but it's also challenging. So it's been great to see.
Absolutely. And I think maybe one thing, because there's a lot to get done, right? I mean, we're looking at quite some complex supply chains. Maybe for someone just listening, right? We have a lot of people in the battery industry, but also interested. Are there any quick wins? Is there somewhere, if you would start, if you want to kind of look at your supply chain today of your battery, is there like a starting point if you haven't really thought about this from an environmental standpoint before? Anywhere you want to get started?
Yeah, so I think when you're starting off, before you even start looking at what is my supply chain, what should I do about it, one of the topics that we were discussing on stage yesterday is understanding who is responsible for your supply chains, and particularly when it comes to sustainability, for the sustainability of your supply chains. Rob could talk more about this, but I guess to give context from the way we see it is, as you pointed out, supply chains of batteries are exceptionally complex. You have cobalt coming from the DRC, nickel coming from Indonesia, lithium coming from Chile, graphite coming from somewhere, manganese coming from somewhere. And so that global distribution back at mine is huge, but also at the same time, you can have 5-10 tiers of supply chain layers within a supply chain between mine and it getting into the actual car. And so there's a huge amount of complexity at play. When you look at the battery itself, the important thing to realize is just even when we're talking about batteries and sustainability supply chains, we're not just talking about the supply chain team having responsibility or the sustainability team having responsibility, but it's also the salespeople going into sales conversations, and like, being asked, what are you doing on sustainability? How are you meeting the EU battery regulations? It's also the R&D team who are having to think about it from a product design perspective. And so, yeah, Rob, maybe you want to talk a bit more about it, but I think understanding, it's not necessarily a quick win, but before you try to get to a quick win, understanding who is this affecting and who needs to be involved. And then, yeah, once Rob talks about it, I can give you a quick sense of what the quick wins are.
Yeah, and I think, well, Sarah's right. The first thing you've got to do is, inside your own company, if you're involved in manufacturing batteries or components or raw materials in the supply chain, is to understand inside the company which functions are going to be in responsible. And as Sarah said, the procurement functions, supply chain functions, but also the engineering, marketing, and the sustainability governance groups have to talk about it first. What is it we want to achieve? And I think for a quick win, you've got to, I would say, engage with your supply chain already and start talking about the topic and start trying to measure and identify where you are. Even with your sort of early development partners, try to bring the topic into reality by measuring what is the actual CO2 and what are the wider impacts on the environment and some of the social aspects. And then you've got to start thinking about your policies. So, how am I going to use that in my selection of suppliers and my partners for the future? It's one of the criteria, as we talked about, with cost, delivery, quality, all those other things that we know and love. But you're going to have to think about the standards that you want to drive inside your supply chain around ESG, and in particular to meet the regulations that are going to come in the next few years. You've got to make sure you're going to be able to meet those, because your customer's going to ask. And start the collaboration process, I would say. So start working with suppliers in a positive way on this topic, and try and encourage them to work with the suppliers, beneath, let's say, the lower tiers, the second, third, right down to the mines. And so try and get this collaboration and discussion going. We've got to get there, and it's going to take us a while. It's a challenge, but we're going to go and do this. We have to do it. Yeah.
And I think to add to the quick win of, start working with suppliers, I think the other thing to make that even quicker is realizing that, the supply chain is complex, but you have to figure out where to start. And so understanding where are you now as quickly as possible, taking all the information and data that you have across the company and putting that into an understanding of, right, this is where we are as a company performing on sustainability, this is where we are as our products, this is where our supply chains are. The reality is that when you do that, you'll realize you have huge data gaps, and that's just a reality of where we are in terms of sustainability today, is that there is varying levels of data collection, data visibility, and so on. But the reason to do that quickly and make sure that's a quick win is that if you have tens or hundreds or thousands of suppliers, not all of your suppliers should be facing the same level of priority. And so using the data that you have today with industry data to understand where are the biggest impacts, where are the key gaps for meeting the regulation, like the EU battery regulation that comes in, is something you can do in a very short space of time to then help you go, okay, based on my knowledge here, where do I need to prioritize next? And making sure that you're making the decisions that are most time critical, business critical, and most impact critical as well.
Brilliant. Sarah, Rob, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting us.
Until next time.
Great. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.